Hello, my name is Kirby and I'm a developer advocate at Pebble. And today I'm going to be walking you through how to build a configuration page from start to finish for your Pebble app. And so this workshop is titled Pebble Slate Workshop. And so you might be asking yourself the question, what is Slate? And so Slate is a front-end framework for building configuration pages for your Pebble apps. And so that's kind of hard to understand maybe. And so it might be easier if I explain the motivation behind Slate. And the motivation behind Slate is this. And this is a configuration page for a Pebble app. And quite frankly, it's not very good. It's a little bit hard to understand what you're supposed to do. It's not very pretty. And by no means is it pebbly at all. And it's okay for me to say this because I made this configuration page. I made this configuration page at a hackathon over a year ago, and I'm honestly just not very proud to say that I made it. So Slate, like I said, is a front-end framework for configuration pages. And so that will take something that looks like this and make it look like this. And so this configuration page is just a lot more pebbly. It's a lot clearer to understand what you're supposed to do. It just looks a lot better. It's just all around a much better configuration page. And so today, we're going to learn how to build a configuration page for a Pebble app from start to finish. And so what we're going to be building specifically is a configurable watch face. So we're going to start off with a watch face that isn't configurable at all. It won't be very exciting. And by the end, we'll have something like this. We'll have a very pretty configuration page, and that configuration page will let us configure our watch face and customize it to our liking. So specifically, the user will be able to select the background color as well as whether they want it to be a 12-hour or 24-hour format watch face. The watch face will persist, meaning when the user selects a new watch face and then decides to come back to this watch face, the color and time format that is selected will stay the same, as well as the user's settings within their configuration page that they select. Those will also be persisted. These are kind of some of the small little details that get kind of annoying to deal with configuration pages, and we're going to make sure that those are really well understood and that you know how to make them work for you. So we'll be using a whole bunch of different tools to make this happen today, but the biggest tool that should be in your tool belt is the Pebble developer website. And so on the Pebble developer website, there's a whole bunch of different tutorials and guides, as well as a full list of API documentation on how to do anything for the Pebble. And so this should be the biggest tool in your tool belt, and you should utilize this all the time. The other big website that you should know about is Slate's documentation. So the Slate documentation website basically is just a huge list of all the different components you can use to build a Slate configuration page, as well as the HTML markup that you'll actually write to build that configuration page. There are a couple of other tools that we'll be learning about today, and those include HTTP Server, ngrok, Bower, Github Pages, the Pebble Tool, and the Chrome Developer Console. So we're going to be learning about all these different tools and how to use them to make configuration pages a lot easier. So let's go ahead and get started making this configuration page. And the way we're going to do that is by going to pebble.io/slate-template to download a template app. So let's go ahead and do that right now, pebble.io/slate-template. And on the right-hand side, I can go ahead and go over to this Git repo and copy clone path. And I can just type git clone and clone the project. And so this assumes that you have Git installed. If you don't have Git installed, you can really easily go to Google and type in how to install Git, and that should take you from there. So now we just go ahead and clone this project. We'll go ahead and CD into it. And from here, we're going to go ahead and get started. So this is just a really simple, basic Pebble template project. And so it has an appinfo.json. It has a source folder. And inside the source folder, you'll see it has a main.c file. So So if we open this up in our favorite text editor, you can see that this is a super simple watch face. We have a window, you go to text layer, we have the method that updates the time, and in this case we're going to update the time through the tick handler, which updates the time every minute. And we have other basic Pebble APIs. So I'm not going to go through what all is going on here. There are other videos and tutorials on how to do that. But just know that this is only like a 60-line program. It's really simple, and it tells you the time. So let's see what this actually looks like. So if we go ahead and use the Pebble Tool, which you can get at developer.pebble.com by going over to the right-hand side and click Get the SDK, and then you can follow the instructions on how to install it for Mac or Linux. That gives you access to this Pebble Tool. And we can use it to run things like Pebble Build, which will build our source code into a binary, which we can then use Pebble Install to install that binary to our watch. Not only can we do like something like --phone and then type in our phone's IP address, but we can do --emulator and run it on our computer by running an emulator of the Pebble. So there are two different kinds of emulators. There's the Applied emulator, which emulates the Applied platform, which are our black and white watches, like the Pebble and the Pebble Steel. And then there's the Basalt emulator, which emulates the Basalt platform, which are the color watches, like the Pebble Time and the Pebble Time Steel. So now if we open this up, we can see that this is the watch face. It's black and white, even though it's running on a color emulator, which isn't very exciting. And then also just tells the time in 12-hour format, which also isn't very exciting. It's not customizable, it's not very fun, and it's not very pebbly. So let's fix that. So we'll run Pebble kill to kill the emulator. And so now we can go ahead and get started creating our configuration page and then hooking it up to our Pebble app. But before I go in and explain all the things we're going to be doing today, let me explain to you the easiest way for you to follow along today. And so we're going to be writing a whole bunch of code today, and it might be hard to follow along. Obviously, you can pause the video at any time, but the easiest way for you to follow along today is by checking out the different commits that I have in this repo. So if you run git log, you can see that actually the top commit, the last commit that I committed, says basic Pebble watch face. And the commit before that was create index.html, main.js, and style.css. And if we keep going all the way down to the very first commit in the repo, the very first commit was update C code to handle config settings. And so the very last commit is actually our finalized project. So that means is I committed everything in reverse order. So all you need to do is run git checkout head ~1, and that will check out the very commit before the commit that you're currently on. And if you keep doing that, you'll get to keep checking out the code as I'm writing it. So now I can see that there's now a index.html page that has some stuff in it that didn't exist before. And all you need to do is keep running git checkout to see the code as I write it. Of course, you don't have to do that if you don't want to. If you want to, you can just write the code as I do. But just a cool little thing. So let's go ahead and talk about the project today. And so we're going to be building a configuration page, as you might know. And so a configuration page, really all it is a website. And so we build a website, we include Slate on that website, we style our website, and then we connect our Pebble app to that website. Once the two are connected, we then have to figure out a way to serialize the information on the configuration page, all the options that the user chose, and then send those to the phone, and eventually send them from the phone to the watch. And the watch has to have logic to handle how to update itself accordingly. So that's what we're going to be doing today. So like I said, first we're going to want to go ahead and create a basic website. So I have a text expander installed on my computer, which lets me really quickly save little snippets of code or commands and writes them to my screen. So don't be freaked out about that. It's just a way for me to save time. So the first thing we're going to do is create a folder called config, which we've done. And inside that folder, we're going to create a JS and CSS folders. So if we run tree, you can see that inside of config, I've done that. Now, the next thing I want to do is go ahead and create some files inside those folders. So now if you go inside config, you can see that we now have a style sheet, a JavaScript file, as well as an index.html file. So let's go ahead and go to index.html, and what we want to do is create just a super basic HTML template. And so this is a super basic HTML web page, and all we can do is say, like, hello world. Really simple. And we can go ahead and save it. So now that we have the super basic HTML page, what we want to do is we want to go ahead and look at it. And we're going to do that by creating a new shell. And from that shell, we'll cd into our config folder. And then we'll run one of those tools that we talked about, http-server. Now to install HTTP server, you run npm install -g for global, and you type http-server. So you have to have npm installed. If you don't have npm installed, you can just Google how to install npm. But basically, this will install a command line tool called http-server, which makes it really easy to create, surprise, surprise, an HTTP server. And so now everything that's in this folder, inside this config folder, will be served at localhost 8080. So go to localhost 8080, and you can see it says hello world. If I go back to index.html and say hello world 2, save it, go back to Chrome and refresh, those changes will appear magically. So that's pretty handy. And that creates a really easy way for us to see what's going on our configuration page in real time. I'm going to use this time to talk about another really handy tool called ngrok. So if you don't have ngrok installed, you can just Google how to install ngrok. But basically, ngrok is a way to tunnel something that lives on your local domain, something that lives within on your computer that only your computer has access to, and tunnels it to the internet. So if I run ngrok with some special different commands, which you can look these all up on the internet, this will now tunnel my localhost 8080 to kirby.ngrok.io. So instead of going to localhost 8080, I can go to kirby.ngrok.io and see the exact same thing. And the reason this is really handy is because now I can actually install a Pebble app that can talk to this configuration page, and it doesn't have to be on the same network that my computer's on. And if my IP address changes, it doesn't matter. It just makes it really, really easy for me to test things and come back to them later, and makes the setup just a lot more simple. So in order to install Slate, we're going to run another special command from a special tool called bower. So we want to first go into our config folder, and in order to get bower, we run npm install -g bower. And so bower is a package manager just like npm or like brew, but for front-end frameworks. So I can run things like bower install jQuery, bower install bootstrap. Pretty much any front-end framework you can think of, you can install via bower. So in our case, we're going to install Pebble-Slate. And this would install Slate to the current directory. But before we want to do this, we actually want to run a different command called bower init. And so if I ls my directory right here, you can see everything I have. And then if I run bower init, it's going to ask me a whole bunch of different questions. I don't really care about these questions very much, so I'm just going to keep hitting enter. But at the very end of this, after it's done, what it's done is it's created a new file called bower.json. And if you look at bower.json, it actually just specifies all of the bower dependencies that this project has. And so right now we don't actually have any bower dependencies. But let's go ahead and add one. So let's say bower install pebble-slate, and we'll say --save. And this will go ahead and install Slate to my current directory. But since we use --save, it will also save Pebble-Slate as a dependency in our bower.json, which we can see right here. And now, if we were to ever commit this file, this bower.json, to the repo, and someone was to clone it and use it later, all they'd have to do is run bower install, and then bower would look at the bower.json file and install all of the dependencies. Just something that's really handy to know about. So now if we ls the directory, we'll see there's a new folder called bower components. And inside of bower components, there's a new folder called pebble-slate. And if we look at bower components, Pebble Slate, you can see that this is actually just the Git repository for Slate. It has a history, it has it's a gulp file, it has its own bower.json, but then also has this folder called dist, which is short for distribution. And these are all the files that we're going to want to include in our configuration page. More specifically, we're just going to include slate.min.css and slate.min.js. The fonts will be referenced from the CSS file, and then everything will be good to go. So now we can go ahead and actually include these dependencies. Style sheet, and then give a link to where that file exists. And similarly, we'll do the same thing for the JS part and include the Slate JavaScript file. So now if I save this file, go back to Chrome and refresh the page, you can see instantaneously it looks a lot different. Hello World is formatted with a new font. The background color of the website is a lot different. So we're actually using Slate right now, which is pretty cool. From here, we can go ahead and start actually using some Slate components. So one of the first components we're going to want to use is something called a container. And so we have a lot going on here, so I'm going to walk you through it one bit at a time. And so we have a Slate container, which is just item-container. Inside that container div, we have a item container content, and then we have an item. If we go ahead and save this and refresh the page, you can see exactly what this looks like. And right now, I'm going to go ahead and use one more tool. Right now, this is full screen. This is not what it's going to look like on someone's phone. So what we can do is we can click Inspect Element, which will open up the JavaScript console, but also lets us just drag this median and make it look a little bit more like a phone. If you want to, you can actually click the phone button, which will actually do something similar, and you can select different models of phone and stuff. But I just personally just like doing this. So you can see what it looks like now. And so these different components, I kind of want to show you what these different components do. And so the item container, what it does is it adds some margin to the top. And so if you have a whole bunch of item containers, it basically puts some padding in between the different containers. The item container content is what is used for anytime you have content. And what that does is adds some color to differentiate the content from the other parts of the container. And then the last thing is the item. And the item adds some padding to every item. And also, if you have multiple items, it will let you distinguish the different ones by having these little borders in between them. So you can see it's like really easy to create lists of items and all different kinds of things with Slate. So now that we have this, the next thing that we're going to want to go ahead and do is copy it. And so once we copy it, we can create a different type of item, like a color picker. And so here we're creating a color picker for the background color. And so this is how you create an item that's a background color picker, or a color picker. We give it a label name, and we also give it the actual color picker. And so we specify a default value for the color picker. We give it a whole bunch of classes that are required by Slate. And then we go ahead and give an ID. Now the ID is optional, but we give an ID so that we can later reference this input element and pull out its value using JavaScript. So if we save this page and refresh our page, you can see this is what it looks like. And now someone can click this, They can click the different color they want, and then we can use that information accordingly. Another thing that we can do is we can create another item for the time format. So here we are specifying another label, and then we're saying that it's going to be a checkbox, and we're going to give it a default value of being checked. And then again, the ID is optional, but we're using an ID here so that we can later pull out this value using JavaScript. So we save this page, we can refresh, and we can see that here now we have the ability to check and uncheck this 24-hour checkbox. Pretty cool. A couple other things we'll add using Slate. We'll go ahead and add a header. So here we've added a header. We save it, we can refresh and see what that looks like. Similarly, we can add a footer. Save it, refresh it, see what a footer looks like. What else is this configuration page missing? Well, it's missing a submit button. And you can see what a submit button will look like using Slate. And finally, it's missing a title. And so right now, if we were just to add a basic H1 title, it would look something like this. It looks pretty awful. And so instead, what we can do is, since this is just HTML, we can add a custom class. So I'll say title, and then we'll go ahead and open up our style sheet, our style.css file. And in here, we can create some CSS to make this title look a lot better. Custom style sheets that we created. So now if I refresh the page, you can see it looks a whole lot better. But something's a little bit off here. You can see that the padding on the top and the bottom are different, even though I specified it differently in here. So now we can use the Chrome developer tools and really take advantage of them. If we click the little magnifying glass, we can select this element, and we can see that the element right below it has its own padding at the top. So rather than setting differing paddings on the top and bottom of this element, what we can do instead is just wrap it in its own item container. And now it looks a whole lot better. But it looks a little, the padding on the top and bottom is a little bit big. If we inspect it, we can change it manually by clicking in here and using the down arrow to change the top and bottom padding. And we can see, oh wow, that looks so much better. Actually, I think 0 padding probably looks the best. So it's going to make that change permanent in here. I just changed this to 0. Saving it, refresh the page, and you can see that now that change is permanent and it looks pretty fantastic. So our configuration page is actually, from a aesthetic standpoint, completely done. We have every component that we really want. Next, we need to figure out how to connect this configuration page to our Pebble app. In order to do that, we're going to go back and edit a file called pebble.jsapp.js. And this is where all the JavaScript that's executed in the Pebble mobile app exists. And so this is really the glue logic in between the configuration page and the watch. So in here, we're going to want a couple different things. The very first thing we're going to want is this ready event listener. And this just lets us know when the JavaScript is loaded on the phone. The next thing that we're going to want is to actually connect this Pebble app to the configuration page that we just created. And we do that by adding an event listener for show configuration. And then from there, we just pass a URL to this pebble.openURL function to the URL of where our configuration page exists. And then so when a user is on the Pebble mobile app and clicks the settings page for your app, they'll then get redirected to this right here. And so we can actually emulate this right now. If we go ahead and go back and run Pebble build, we're going to rebuild the app with this new JavaScript file that we just created. Could run Pebble install, emulator, Basalt, and we're actually going to add logs so we can see if the JavaScript is successfully run. Right here, we should see PebbleKit.js is ready, which we do, which is awesome. We see that PebbleKit.js is ready. And now if we create another shell, we can run pebble emu-app config. And this should open up the configuration page that's specified in the PebbleKit.js code. And it does. So you can see it opens up a page just like we would expect, basically emulating what the user would do on the phone. And we can also see that it was successfully logged in the JavaScript logs. Awesome. So now, how do we get information from the configuration page into this JavaScript right here? Well, we do that through a special URL called Pebble.js close. So we're going to add an event listener for WebView closed. And what will happen is whenever the user goes to Pebble.js ://close, this function, this callback right here will get called. And in this callback, we get this E object. And on the E object is this response value. And inside of response, we basically get all of the parameters that were passed to Pebble.js ://close. And then from there, we can then parse that out using json.parse and store that in a variable. What we can do is we can actually specify some information in here. We can say something like color equals white and format equals 12 or something like that. And then we'll get all that information in here, and then we can use that information and pass it to the watch. So let's go ahead and do that. So we're going to close this JavaScript file. This is PebbleKit.js code. This is the code that gets ran inside the Pebble mobile app on either the Pebble iOS app or the Pebble Android app. And we're going to open up a different JavaScript file. We're going to first open up our index.html file, and then we're going to open up config.js main. And this is the main JavaScript file that gets run on our configuration page. So this is a different JavaScript file. There's an important distinction here. There's the JavaScript that gets run on the phone inside the Pebble mobile app, and then there's the JavaScript that gets run actually on the configuration page itself. So let's go ahead and include a reference to this file within our HTML. And then we can do something just really simple. We'll just do a simple little sanity check. We'll do console.log hello. Now we can close index. We can save this file. And if we go back to our configuration page, if we refresh, we should see hello in the JavaScript console. And we do, which is awesome. But now let's go ahead and figure out how we want to serialize all the information on this page and then pass it to that Pebble.js ://close. And so how we'll do that is when the user clicks submit, when they click the submit button, we're going to want ahead and serialize all the data on the page and then change the URL of the page to Pebble.js close. So the first thing that we're going to want to do is bind a click event to the submit button. And so you might see a familiar syntax here. You're seeing this $ syntax, and this $ syntax is usually associated with jQuery. And now there is no jQuery currently inside our index.html page. We reference jQuery nowhere in here. We don't reference it here. We don't reference it in here. And that's because jQuery is not installed right now. And Slate does not utilize jQuery. Slate does utilize something similar to jQuery. Slate uses a lightweight version of jQuery called Zepto. That's Z-E-P-T-O. And so Zepto has this $ syntax for pulling out DOM elements, which is super, super handy. Super handy feature of jQuery, but we don't really need all of jQuery to get the job done. We can just use Zepto and not have to include a 40 megabyte JavaScript file onto our website. Similarly, Zepto also has this really sexy .on event handler function, which we also will take advantage of. And so we'll use $ parentheses to pull out our submit button, which we added a ID onto. If we go over here, we can see the submit button has an ID of submit button. So we just say $ parentheses # submit button, and now we have our submit button. And we're going to go ahead and store it in a variable. And a common naming convention for whenever you use Zepto or jQuery to get an element on the page is you prefix that with a $. So this way you know that this variable is not a native DOM element, but rather a Zepto DOM element. And so once we have that, we can then do awesome things like use .on click and then pass in a callback to it. And so now if we comment out this code, every time that someone clicks submit, we should see submit appear in the JavaScript console, which we do, which is awesome. And this is where we're going to go ahead and make function calls to serialize our data and then ultimately change our URL. So you can see that the first thing we do is call this get query parameter, which doesn't exist yet, but I can kind of explain what's happening here. So Pebble.js is an important URL for passing information to PebbleKit.js. But when we're testing on Cloud Pebble or when we're testing locally, like in Chrome, Chrome doesn't know anything about Pebble.js. If I go to Pebble.js://close, like it just Googles it. Like it doesn't know what it is. It means nothing to it, where it does mean something on the Pebble mobile app. So instead, we actually have a special URL that's encoded in this return to variable. And so if you look at this, this is actually a URL for a server that's running locally on our machine. And that server is being run by this EMU app config within the Pebble tool. And so that is where, when we're doing development, when we're doing testing locally, that's where all of our information will get passed to, and we'll eventually then pass it to PebbleKit.js. So it's important that when we're testing that we need to decide whether we're going to pass our information to return to or whether we're going to pass it to Pebble.js close. And that's what this get query parameter, the get query parameter function. And this is literally just copy and pasted off of the developer website. But this figures out whether or not to use the return to path or the Pebble.js path, and then also we'll get the return to path if it does exist. And then once we have that, we can then encode all of our information and then change the change the current web address to that URL. So that's what document.location does. If we go in here and type document.location equals google.com, I need to add the HTTPS so it actually works. You can now see that I'm redirected to google.com. So that's all we're doing. Here we're just changing the URL to the correct return to domain, and then also we encode all the information from our configuration page. And that's what this get and store config data function does. So let's go ahead and write that. So it's pretty simple. What we do is we create two references to the pieces of information we care about, our background color picker and our time format checkbox. Once we have those, we go ahead and store their value in this JavaScript key value dictionary literal. And you can see that we're actually storing them in two different ways. Here we get the value by doing .val on the Zepto selector. And here you can see that we use the Zepto selector, get the 0th element of it, and then do .checked. So why are these two functions different? Why are we doing it in two different ways? Well, we have to do it in two different ways because web standards aren't fantastic. So let's go ahead and open up another configuration page. And we'll actually just run this code right here. So we go ahead and get the background color picker. And then once we have it, we can do .val on it. So let's go ahead and change the color to red, hit enter, and you can see we get the hex value and a string for red. Change it to green, run it again. See, now we get a different hex value. This is the hex value for green. which is awesome. Like, that's what the Pebble code expects. Similarly, if we do get our time format and then do time format and do .val, we get on. Oh, because it's checked, right? Not so much. If we uncheck it and run it again, it still says on. And that's because we're talking about a checkbox. And checkboxes don't have the val operator on them. They have the .checked operator on them. So what we have to do is we have to take our Zepto object, and then from it pull out the native DOM object, and then from the native DOM object do .checked on it, and that will return true or false accordingly. And that's why these two things are different. From there, we go ahead and store them in local storage. So local storage is a way to persist information. So we're going to go ahead and take these two values, store them in local storage, and then when the user comes back to this page, we're able to pull them out of local storage and then repopulate those fields. And then the last thing, obviously, we just need to return this options dictionary, which will then get encoded using JSON, and then the URL will change to the correct path and get passed to PebbleKit.js. So right now, if we go ahead and save this, and we go back to PebbleKit.js, and if we look at PebbleKit.js, right now, it should log out whatever information is passed to it. So let's see if it works. We'll run Pebble build, and we'll run Pebble install. Say the emulator is Basalt, and we'll get some logs. Now if we go back here and emulate the configuration page after it's installed, and we should see this information in the logs. So I click submit, I see OK, and you can see right here that the information was passed into the URL, and then it was actually successfully parsed out of the PebbleKit.js. Super awesome. There's a problem with this configuration page, though. In this configuration page, I select my colors, and if I refresh the page, they just fall back to normal. So let's go ahead and fix that. We stored our information that we want in local storage, but now let's go ahead and pull it out. So let's create a new function called load options. And what load options will do is load options will get our two DOM elements, see if there is stuff in local storage, and if there is stuff in local storage, it will then go ahead and pull them out of local storage and then change them on the website, on the web page. And so now we need to call this load options function, and we're going to call it a very special way. We're going to call it using something called a self-executing anonymous function. So here's an anonymous function. Here's a call to load options. We'll actually create something called submit handler too, and we can just wrap our submit button in it. Submit handler. Cut that out of there, paste it in there. And you can also call it. But then what we're going to want to do is we're going to want to make it call itself. So we're going to wrap it in parentheses and then call itself. So basically what happens is as soon as this JavaScript file is loaded, it will immediately call load options, and immediately call submit handler. So when it calls load options, those values will be populated on the screen, and then Slate will then style them accordingly, and then it'll also find the submit button and bind this on-click event handler. So if we save this, refresh the page, now you can see that our options are being persisted. If I click green and without 24-hour, click submit. If I go back and refresh, it's still green. If I click 24-hour, click submit. If I go back, it's still clicked. If I keep refreshing the page, it's still there. Awesome. So now we're completely and totally done with our actual configuration page. Now we just need to wire up PebbleKit.js and our actual Pebble C app. So we know that we're successfully getting our information in here. in this config data variable, but we need to go ahead and send it to the watch. And to do that, we'll just send an app message. So you can see right here, we're seeing if there actually is stuff in this config data. If there is, then we send an app message. And we just send a dictionary with the background color. And so since it currently is just a hex string, we're going to want to change that hex string into an integer. So we're going to say that since it's hex, we're going to say 16, give it the string, and then we'll return an integer. We'll store that into background color. And then here we just have a true or a false value, and we'll store it in 24-hour format. Then we have a successful callback and a failed callback for whether or not it made it to the watch. And that's it for the Pebble.js code. Now we just need to make sure that we actually handle this information accordingly in the C side of things. So if we go to main.c, we now just need to write some code to handle this app message. So the first thing we're going to want to do is create some pound defines for those two different key values. We're going to have one for color, for the background color, and one for the 24-hour format. So right now we need to go to our appinfo.json and add these. So I'm just going to go ahead and add capabilities, which I'm going to say that it's going to be configurable. That's really important for our configuration app. And then also I'm going to add app keys. And I'm going to say the background color, the string that we see in PebbleKit.js is going to be 0 in the C side. And the 24-hour format, the string that we see over there, is going to be 1 on the C side. And then we're just going to go ahead and save that. And then now those two things are mapped to each other. Awesome. The next thing that we're going to do is create a bool for whether or not the 24-hour format is active. And then we want to go ahead and handle that accordingly in update time. As you can see, we are just handling whether or not the 24-hour time format is true or false. Then what we want to do is we want to go ahead and add a callback for our app message. And that's what we're doing right here. We'll bind this event handler down below in the code later. So it's pretty simple. Every time we get an app message, this callback will get fired. And then we need to figure out whether we're talking about a background color or a 24-hour time format. And then we just handle it accordingly. If we're talking about the background color, we go ahead and get its integer value out, and we set the background color in text. So we're going to need, and then also we write it to persistent storage. And this is so that we can then later, when the user comes back to the app, that this color will be loaded dynamically. Similarly, if it is a 24-hour format, we get its value out, we just change our global variable, we then write it to persistent storage, and then we just call update time. Let's go ahead and write this function for set background color in text, though. Awesome. And all this is doing is taking in the color, getting its gcolor from hex, which is just our integer value. We then set the background color to the screen, and then we did also do something that's really handy. We want our text to be legible relative to our background color, so there's this handy function called gcolor legible over. And this will return to us a legible color given a background color. And then so we just change the text color accordingly. And that's pretty much all done. All we need left to do is update the persistent storage. So when the window is loaded, we need to figure out whether there's a background color already stored in persistent storage. If there is, we'll read it out and change the background color. Similarly, if there's a 24-hour format, we're going to want to read it out and change it, and then call update time. So all we need left to do is register that event handler for app messages, and then also open up the app message protocol. And now if we save this, go back here and run Pebble, build, and install, it should build successfully, which it does. It'll go ahead and install it to the emulator. And you can see I already had some stuff in persistent storage, so it loaded them right now, which is a pretty good sign. Let's go ahead, though, and see if we can change it. So we'll open up our configuration page, pull up our emulator, and now if I change the color to blue and change the time format to 24 hours and click submit, immediately the changes occur. And now if I go ahead and run Pebble kill and kill the emulator, and then I run Pebble install and start up the emulator again, we should still see the blue color and the 24-hour time format, which we do. Awesome. So there's one last thing that I want to talk about. So basically, you understand now how to build a configuration page and how to connect it to a Pebble app. But there's a question that you might have thinking in your head right now. Where do I host this configuration page website? Obviously, we don't just want it running on our computer like it is right now. We want it to be in a more reliable place. And since we're just serving static content, it's really easy for us to take advantage of something called Github Pages. So if you go to pages.github.com, Github Pages is a place that lets you host static websites. So roll vanilla or generate a site for your project to quickly get started. What we can do here is if you just follow these instructions by going to pages.github.com, it'll show you really easily how to create one of those pretty github.io/whatever websites. So you just follow these instructions, so it'll show you how to upload all of your HTML and JavaScript and CSS and how to host your websites, your static websites on GitHub Pages. So let's go ahead and go back to the keynote and just recap really quickly. So to wrap up, so what did we do today? We created a configuration page, which is really just a website. We styled that configuration page using Slate. We then wrote some JavaScript that allowed us to serialize the information on that page, store it in LocalStorage so that we can then load it up later, and then we used that serialized information and then passed it to our URL, which would pebble.js://close. From there, we got a callback in PebbleKit.js where we were able to read that URL, parse out the information, send an app message to the watch, and then on the watch, we were able to receive that app message with the information that we cared about and update the watch accordingly. We also stored that information on Persistent Storage on the watch, so this way, if a user closes out the watch app and opens it up again, they'll still see the information that they saw before. We really created a truly end-to-end configuration page example. Thanks.